Marc Andrus, Andrus. I'm the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of California, which is the Episcopal Church in the Bay Area. So it's San Francisco is the center, but it includes Palo Alto and the Peninsula and Berkeley and Oakland and up through Marin County. We have 72 congregations of Episcopal churches in that area. And I've been serving as the bishop here for 18 years. And prior to that, I was a bishop in Alabama. I was inspired. I have a spiritual practice where I ask people to identify a moment of wonder that came to them from some part of the wider world, instead of limited to other human beings. So it could be, as I say, at the micro scale, looking through a microscope, literally, or it could be at the human scale, horses or trees, but it also could be at the cosmic scale, looking at the cosmos. And I found that almost everybody that I've ever talked to has had a moment of wonder mediated by one of these, or even by an ecosystem itself. And that sets people on a path towards, as I put it, we will protect what we love. And I think that for me, that it was growing up in East Tennessee and being in this very beautiful environment, but I also learned it was a very toxic environment. The waters of East Tennessee, those lakes, which are dammed rivers, often had heavy metals in the base, in the sediment, the mud at the bottom, and the rates of cancer in that area are much higher than most of the United States. Part of that is because of radiation coming from the nuclear production of materials used to produce the atomic bombs in World War II. So I had this kind of conflicting experience of great beauty, and also that beauty masking tremendous toxicity, including a morally questionable history of our country in producing the first nuclear armaments and using them on civilian populations. And I think all of that was channeled through my faith. And I came more and more to understand that in Christianity, following Jesus meant so much more. It looked much more like what Martin Luther King Jr.'s life looked like than it looked like a sequestered contemplative who is deliberately removed from the work of the world. And yeah, so that's some of how I got started. This decade that we're well into now in 2024, so 2020 to 2030, is the decisive decade for the future of life on the planet. Not the extinction of all life, but the quality of life. If we engage this remaining 7 years through 2030 with the kind of skillful means, as Buddhists would say, and with the kind of total dedication that we know is needed, we could prevent unimaginable suffering for the future. And the future is here. We're seeing that these models that were further out are actually manifesting sooner. So we are the generation of life, the several generations that are currently inhabiting the earth together. We have an unprecedented opportunity to effect either good or evil. And it's my commitment to do everything I can to engage with others, to collaborate with the most effective, most committed networks I can find of like-minded, like-hearted people, but also to give everything I have to use my abilities and my capacities for this purpose. Well, how did we get here? That's called profit motive. Uh, we got to this state over about a 400-year period, and it was Amitav Ghosh has beautifully chronicled this in one of his nonfiction works, where he starts with it's called The Nutmeg's Curse, and he really starts with the spice trade and the Dutch West Indies Company and the British West Indies Company competing with each other for the control of the spice trade and the objectification of indigenous people who lived on the so-called Spice Islands and the earth itself. And that is a progression, if you will, or a regression that has only intensified over those 400 years. An idea of a living earth that is integrated and has, if you will, standing is a real problem if you want to freely use everything from the earth, including people, as tools and or resources. So an extractive view of the world is morally problematic if we look at the other life on the earth as having standing similar to mine. Then I'm committing a crime, and so in order to not commit crimes, we have to change the ontological status of those beings. They have to become less than human. So that includes humans. And it's convenient if those humans have a different skin color or some way we can distinguish them from the real humans. So that process has been underway and has only gotten stronger with the advent of fossil fuels, because we still measure the capacity of a car, how fast it can go in horsepower. But of course, that we well outstripped, 150 horses, 500 horses. We went way beyond that as soon as we had oil and gas in addition to coal. So we've become unharnessed. We've become unmoored, and we're addicted to that. So we've addicted ourselves to what the power and the comfort that extractive approach to the world has given us. The other side, however, is that what we call in my world the beloved community, which is a model of reality that is interconnected rather than disconnected, where mutuality is based on love between people, that is an experience that is here. So it's not, as Thich Nhat Hanh has said about nirvana, nirvana is not in another realm, as people have said about heaven, heaven is not somewhere else. These are coexistent realities. And in fact, what we claim is that the beloved community, this interconnected world patterned by agape love, is the reality, and that this alienated, disconnected, objectifying, machine model world, extractive, is a false reality. And when you have access to the beloved community and you can experience what it means to live in that way, it's liberating, because you realize you're not stuck in this other reality, this ersatz reality. So I think that is that's our way out, if you will, is inviting people into that experience and living into it as fully as we can, not being shaped or controlled so much by the processes of the false world. Yeah. So I've had the privilege of working closely with indigenous people from a variety of tribal allegiances, from the Standing Rock folks to tribal members in Brazil, Guarani people, Kivalina in Alaska. And it would be wrong to say that there's one indigenous worldview, but there are shared realities that do overlap and do reinforce each other, in my experience, with indigenous worldviews. And one of those is a deeply interconnected world of mutuality, where whole systems are consciously dependent on each other. And many indigenous communities in the world have adopted world religions. So they have become Christian, or they have become Muslim, and yet they are still holding their tribal identity. So from their bases, for instance, in the Pacific Islands with Maori people or Tongans or Samoans, what we find is that it's a different kind of Christianity. And so we find ourselves in the same faith space, but with a very different flavor to it. And I've learned from that. So I think that the way I think about it is that colonized indigenous people are reverse colonizing the colonizers by living their own worldview and living it authentically for themselves. And when people like I are in relationship with them, I find my worldview expanded and challenged, and the attractiveness of what is in resonance with what I call the beloved community, which has points of a reference to indigenous worldviews, starts to be much more attractive. So Christianity starts to be transformed. And I think that's underway. I think that especially for Christians who are climate activists, and I believe that this is also true for my interfaith partners in climate action, we're finding our base religion, which has been shaped by the machine world and the profit motivation for 400 years, our theologies are transforming. And it's probably important to say that it's not a circle. We're not going back to a pre-modern world in the way of just returning. It's a spiral. So everything that we've experienced, all the negativity of it, but also the incredible medical benefits and the things that have happened through science and through our cultural changes, as well as the deeply disfiguring parts of it, they're all part of our history. And so what's going to emerge now with this decolonizing from the colonized peoples is going to be new. It's not going to be a return to the 1300s. It's going to be something that is synergistic and emerges as something we're going to experience as new. I think this is true with this tremendous emphasis on AI right now. What is consciousness? And how are we going to recognize consciousness in so-called inanimate objects? If we just scratch 70 years behind where we are now in the United States, we can see that human beings, Black human beings and brown human beings, were called less than human, and their consciousness was not seen to be the same as white consciousness. In the past year, I've been in conversation with a highly educated white man who is a religious leader who literally believed that chickens, cattle, other animals do not have feelings. That is, sensations where they would feel pain. Um, he literally believed that that was true. And in other words, they're machines, just like you could say that a computer is a machine. So the future of what we're going to understand as life and consciousness, and to whom are we morally accountable, is going to surprise us. It's not going to look like what we think it looks like. So I think we're going to find a future that is not a return to the past, but is a recovery of some of the features of the past where we lived in a living planet. There has been growth, and it's not ahead of them, but to grow with people in an embrace of a healthier, more realistic worldview. I've seen so much of it. There are millions of interfaith people who have been for a long time evolving what, on the one hand, I would call climate solutions, and on the other hand, climate advocacy. And they're not, deeply separated from each other, but they are different, right? So what I mean by climate solution, there's a movement in the Punjab region of India by Sikhs to plant sacred forests. And then they planted over 300 of these. And some of them are not much bigger than this room where I am, but that's a climate solution. And then they're thinking about, how do you link these small forests together so that there's corridors between them for birds and animals to be able to migrate between them safely. Well, that's amazing. And there's finance solutions as well. The Church of England, of which the Episcopal Church, where I'm a bishop, is part of the wider Anglican world. They have divested their huge pension fund is now divested from, or is on the way to being divested from, fossil fuel investments. That's a climate solution. Climate advocacy, I've watched more and more and more people. It's not in civil society, yes, but also coming from churches and synagogues and mosques, take to the streets, but also take to Congress. And they're intelligently, doggedly, determinedly advocating for really thoughtful policy changes. For instance, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. I do not think that the outcome of COP28 in Dubai could have possibly been what it was if it hadn't been for not only the parties from Europe, from Africa, from the Pacific, largely, but also the huge number of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and included in that faith bodies pressing on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. That pressure caused an outcome that I did not expect to happen. And the year before, the Loss and Damage Fund was a last-minute outcome of the COP in Egypt. I am absolutely certain it could not have happened if there had not been a widespread, constant, interconnected advocacy push by all those bodies to keep it in front of people. So yeah, I've seen a big growth. I think the distinguishing factor for the interfaith role in climate solutions and climate advocacy is the centration of values, spiritual values that are central to different religions. So some are shared, different religions share central values, but some are more particular to certain religions. And together, it creates a kind of quilt, if you will, or a network of values that reinforce each other and complement each other. And when I say we centrate them, it would be wrong to say that faith bodies own the area of morality or ethics or values, but it would be right to say that we make it the center of our lives. So I like to use Gopal Patel, who's the head of Bhumi World, which is Bhumi is a Sanskrit word for the world, for the earth. And as a Hindu, Gopal has he has a deep commitment to the COP for biodiversity. So he attends and is part of that COP, which is different than the climate change COP. But he also advocates for a plant-based diet. And that's based on a deeper value of ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And as a Christian, I am a pescatarian. I eat some seafood, but 80% plant-based diet. It's not at the center of Christian thinking. That's just not where Christianity puts its capital. But it is where Hinduism puts part of its capital. So that value is brought into this interfaith space. I wrote, we produced these interfaith meditation cards for this last COP. I don't know if you saw them. They're really beautiful and they're really powerful. And I wrote quite a few of them, but we also ran them past people in those particular religions, but we also got them written by people from those religions. And each one of them is a different value. So the Christian ones, I wrote the 3 of those, and they were forgiveness, reconciliation, were 2 of them, and these are related ideas, and they're very central to Christianity. We don't own them. The idea of forgiveness is not a Christian idea, but it's at the heart of Christianity. So when we add these all together, ahimsa and forgiveness and compassion is very central in Buddhism. In Judaism, one of the really beautiful cards was the idea of taking the long view, which is not a straightforward value like courage or compassion, but the idea of Judaism having 400 years of slavery in Egypt shaped the worldview of Judaism, so that the idea of I may be committed to the faith of Yahweh, of God, and I may be in an enslaved, dominated position, and I may not be free by the time I die. It may be generations that die in slavery. Yet, I believe that taking the long view of staying with my commitments will have an effect, and that God will bring justice in the end. So there's a card on taking the long view. We need to take the long view in terms of climate change. As James Hansen has said, this is the long emergency. And when we talk about, when we compare this struggle, this effort that we're in to World War II or World War I or war in any sense, it's a bad comparison, because the United States comes into that war after it's well underway, World War II. We make this big effort, and then it's over, and then we go back to life as it was, or in fact, we go back to life richer than we were. We just keep the thermostats turned up, et cetera, et cetera. With the long emergency, it's a completely different idea. We have to commit to what we're doing now, and we see no end of that. It's a change of life. It's not just a big war effort and then it's over. So taking the long view is a transformative value. So what the interfaith world is doing is seeing that we're bringing these complementary values from our various religions. We had 9 religions represented in those meditation cards, and together it's this beautiful array that becomes very. If I'm using some of the cards from Taoism, along with Judaism, along with Christianity. I'm not trying to be a Jew or a Taoist. I'm understanding that these are valid spiritual values that complement my own, and that we're inhabiting these together. And so that's what I mean by the interfaith contribution. We are centrating values, and it's also a place where we hold accountable the parties with whom we're working. So business doesn't necessarily have a soul, right? The idea of a corporation doesn't have a mind or a heart or a soul, and thus it doesn't necessarily have values. It might, if a certain board of directors or a certain CEO feels like they should, but not necessarily. Nations don't necessarily hold to moral values. They may claim to. So we hold ourselves to these values, and we also say when we see greed or selfishness or domination, we know what the contrast is with love and forgiveness and compassion, and we call it out. So I think that's part of the faith contribution to this whole work. Sheila Andrus, to whom I'm married, is a major force, along with Stephanie Martin Taylor, who's our communications director, in building out Sustain Island Home. And the phrase Sustain Island Home comes from our liturgy, from the Eucharist, the Holy Communion in the Episcopal Church. We have several forms, and one of them prays in the prayer around the Holy Table for our island home, earth, our island home. And Sustain Island Home is a way of saying that in order to transform the planet into health again, to heal, it's going to take holding into account fossil fuel companies. This is often presented as a dichotomy, right? And it's the argument is that people are being duped to work on individual change, like walking more and putting solar on your house and so on, because the real villains are these gigantic fossil fuel companies and the allied companies with them, and they're trying to convince us that if we do carbon offsets when we fly and and so on, that's the work that needs to be done while they continue to increase oil production and sell products that use more and more fossil fuels. It's both and. The people who are going to really press them the hardest, in my opinion, press the fossil fuel companies the hardest, are the people whose lives have been transformed themselves. Because then you really are acting from a different base. You're not just sort of, well, yeah, it would be a good idea if they phase down, but I'm still benefiting from a fully fossil fuel dependent life. How committed can I really be from that standpoint? And it is a material contribution to take out of the greenhouse gas fund the amount that my household puts out that is not sustainable. So we start with households measuring their carbon footprint. It's a really interesting, easy idea. It's a common idea. There are many, many, many carbon trackers out there. And what we did was survey quite a few of them, and we found the one that was most usable, sort of the Apple equivalent of a carbon tracker, like the iPhone equivalent, like highly, highly user-friendly. And then we worked with the developer and founder of that company, and she allowed us to create our own landing page. So she's got a platform, and the platform anybody can use. The Girl Scouts of America can use it. Your town council can use it. Your organization, Sapience, could use it. But on top of the platform, we created a way that Episcopalians would encounter it, that would be inviting to them. What we found is that the bar to measuring your carbon footprint is pretty high. People are anxious about doing this because they intuit that they believe that it's going to mean bad changes in their life. We're going to go back to living in the caves, as the president of the COP said to Mary Robinson in that heated exchange. You're just going to take us back to fires and living in the cave and so on. I mean, this ridiculous idea, but it is where people are living. They're worried that that living a sustainable lifestyle means living a deprived lifestyle. And so what we wanted to do was take that bar down as low as we could. So when you encounter this landing page, you'll see quotations from our sacred scriptures, letter from our presiding bishop, letter from your own bishop, quotations from our liturgy, images that are beautiful and inviting and familiar. And so you're invited into this, and you're given choices. Once you've measured your carbon footprint, which is because the platform is so good, it's easy to do, then you have a suite of choices that come under your household heating and cooking, but also your travel, all these areas, and they go from really easy. There's 72 different actions, but they are less expensive and very simple to more expensive and not as simple, and you can make a plan. So here's my carbon footprint, and here's what it's going to take over even a 5-year period to get to a sustainable carbon footprint. So that we did that, and it was adopted at the General Convention, the legislative convening of the Episcopal Church. Our presiding bishop endorsed it as well. And we've been trying to scale it up. As World Resources Institute has said, there's 3 things that we should be doing. I think this is important for all bodies to do, which is you envision it, and then you measure it, and then you scale it. But you have to do all 3 of these things. So just creating the carbon tracker and that whole process is not enough. We've got to enlist people into it and know what our goal is. If it's carbon neutrality by 2030 for the Episcopal Church, what is it going to take to get there? How many households would need to use the carbon tracker? How much would they need to take out of greenhouse gas emissions for their household, all added together to reach carbon neutrality by 2030? We have an idea of the impact of what that would be if the Episcopal Church, even 30% of it, used the tracker and did the work. It would be like taking the greenhouse gas emissions from Coca-Cola for a year out of the atmosphere. Our church at 30% would do that, or the equivalent of the greenhouse gas emissions of a modest-sized country like Paraguay. Yeah, so that was the carbon tracker. Well, the carbon tracker is a good place to begin because it's in your agency. You don't have to change the mind of a congressperson. You don't have to make a company reverse its policies. You start with your household and the things that you have control over. And when you can see that those are having an effect, then that builds your confidence that you can do more. The other thing about it is we wanted a tracker that is additive. By that, I mean, you can add your scores, your choices, and their outcomes to those in your community. And then at the regional level, and then at the national and international level. And that is useful for advocacy purposes. When I do lobbying on climate in Congress, I can say to my representatives from the Bay Area to Congress, oh, yeah, I believe in this policy. And by the way, the Episcopal Church has made these commitments. and had these outcomes. So we're in it. We have skin in the game, as people like to say, and it makes a difference. The representatives I've talked to pay much closer attention when they know that there's a collective commitment and it has these effects, even as we're building it. So there is that. The other thing, as you may know, I wrote a book about the friendship between Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the things that was striking to me as a research question was in 2014, Thich Nhat Hanh, just before the stroke that robbed him of speech and of walking and writing, he made this statement about Martin Luther King's death, his assassination, and its effect on him. And one of the things he said is that he made a vow to maintain what Martin called the beloved community. And he said, I believe I have kept that vow to this day. So from 1968 to 2014, he had kept this vow. But he didn't say how. In what ways did he keep this vow? And so I worked on that. I think there's a lot of ways to answer it. His peace activism, his gender equality work, his work on the environment. But the other thing that he's most known for worldwide was, as Time magazine said when he moved back to Vietnam in 2018, the monk who taught the world mindfulness is going home. So mindfulness is a practice that is in everybody's grasp. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, at any moment, you can touch the ultimate. It is entirely yours. And this is very powerful. No, you don't have to be a part of an organization. You don't have to have a lot of money or power. You practice mindfulness, and you are actually changing the world from your mindfulness practice. I think this is completely transformative, and that's one of the things I would say to people who feel paralyzed. The last thing I would say about that is acknowledging the grief and the fear and the sorrow. We're learning more and more about how important that is. So just as climate grief is a known psychological category now and has therapeutic approaches to climate grief, we also know, again, often from indigenous cultures, that lament is an important way to move through the paralysis that we're in until we can really own our feelings and not sublimate them. We are less able if we can't do that, if we can't own that and bring it to consciousness, we're less able to move out of paralysis. So the anger and the fear and the tears, all of that, we may say that is a necessary part of our journey towards healing. And just saying it's fine, we're courageous, we know what we're doing, we can do this. That's probably not enough. We probably need to be able to stoop down to this narrow entrance to the cave and go through that dark passage to the place where light will re-emerge. Well, certainly Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King Jr. Also Ruby Sales, you may know Ruby. She is a long-term civil rights activist. She was a teenage student at Tuskegee during the civil rights movement, and Jonathan Daniels literally gave his life protecting hers. And she has used her precious life to be one of the most wise, courageous speakers in the area of justice, racial, social, and environmental. And I feel very, privileged that she's a friend and that we collaborate with each other. the late Vincent Harding, who wrote the first draft of Dr. King's Beyond Vietnam sermon at Riverside Church, where he very clearly and in detail and with passion declared his opposition to the Vietnam War. I was privileged to spend time with Vincent and learn from him. The founder of the Taizé community, Brother Roger, in France, and Taizé itself is a really inspiring place where it's ecumenical. It's not interfaith, but it's ecumenical, and it's been a source of so much transformation for young adults and youth. Thousands and thousands come every year into that space, which was reserved in other monastic communities to just the monks, and they share their lives and their work, their vision with young people. That's had a big influence. I mean, there are many, many sources. I've been very privileged to have great teachers and moral people who shaped my life morally. I'm married to the most amazing person I've ever met, and she teaches me all the time and changes my worldview on a sort of daily basis. I also would say, you know, the creatures, other kind that have shared life with me. I was privileged enough to have a horse when I was growing up that I had cared for. Having responsibility for another life where they are dependent on my care is, you know, many young people go through this, and other life teaches us so much about our own lives. You said this earlier in respect to AI and other forms that by comparison and by contrast, we learn who we are. You know, so I often say that we don't lose ourselves when we become intimate with another life. We actually become more ourselves in those intimate relationships. It teaches us who we really are, not who we think we are. Well, I would say start with your own spiritual practice, and you could call that prayer, as I would. You could call it meditation, which has many crossovers with prayer, and vice versa. But start with practice, and don't be constrained by how people say you should practice. It should be a practice that fits your life. One of the things I've found is that when we in Christianity hear the term spiritual but not religious, we often leap to the thought that, oh, they're ripe to become part of our community. And I think that's missing something really important, which is inquiry and attention to say to such a person, well, what does that mean for you? What is your spirituality? What do you have your own practice, and how did you evolve it, and what is it? And I found that it's kind of dizzying. People are making up their spiritual practices all the time, and they're startling, they're beautiful, they're nuanced, they're remarkable. So I would say, you know, do that. Draw on the traditional spiritual practices of the world that are your own. You know, take the one seat, as Jack Kornfield says. You don't necessarily want to dabble in everybody's religion, but what's there? You know, people present contemplative prayer in Christianity as the pinnacle, and sitting immobile quietly and clearing thoughts away. Well, that's not for everybody. St. Francis used visualization. He's the person who made the first Christmas pageant, and that more image-based or story-based spiritual practice is much more suited to some people than clearing thoughts and having a traditional contemplative way. So I would say start with that. Another thing would be to establish what I call beloved community circles, where you create a deliberately diverse group from the beginning. So we often create groups of like-minded people, and like-minded means we look like each other too, or maybe we have the same social status or the same economic status. And we think we're going to be happier in those more homogenous groups. But in fact, what I have found is that people, when I interview them, when I talk with them, if they have an experience of a deeply diverse community that's working together as a community, they're much happier than the homogenous group of however it's construed by race or income. There is a church, a non-denominational church in Washington, D.C. called the Church of the Savior, and they created freedom circles that have inspired me to talk about beloved community circles. And a freedom circle was deliberately diverse from the beginning. So you establish the DNA of the group as diverse from the start. You don't get your like-minded, like-looking people and then just try to diversify it. You start with a diverse group. And their goal was to use the 12 steps of the 12-step program to free themselves, not from addiction to substances, but from what they considered our cultural addiction to white male supremacy. Well, this is just an amazing goal. And so I kind of based the idea of beloved community circles partly on the freedom circles of the Church of the Savior, to say, build a diverse community. And it doesn't have to be a big community, but reach out to someone who, by some measure, is not like you, and make common cause with them around climate, and see how you can help each other, and how you complement each other in the way that I've discovered with these interfaith groups. We work so beautifully together, and we're not divided by different beliefs, while there are different beliefs. And there's some areas where we would definitely disagree. And I think it's important to name those areas too, and not pretend they don't exist. So, there in Christianity, there are three major denominations: Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Anglicanism, of which I'm a part. And only of those sort of almost 2 billion people, that's a lot of people. Of that number, only the Anglicans ordain women. Well, that's a huge thing, and it's a big dividing line. And only we, among that 2 billion people, ordain the openly LGBTQ communities. So it could be a barrier. We could just say we can't work together. What I've found is that I can be explicit about my commitments and my faith body's commitments, and say that into that space, and no matter how uncomfortable that is, and say that I'm resolved about that, but I'm willing to work on this together. And I found that in an interfaith space, it works.